Welcome to Republican Roundtable. I'm Max Reimer. As many of you know, we have a August 14th primary election coming up, and nowhere is that more important than the gubernatorial race on the Republican side of the aisle. It probably is for the Democrats too, but for the sake of being the Republican Roundtable, we're talking about the Republican race, and with us today we have self-dubbed the fixer of the Jeff Johnson for governor campaign, Danny Nadeau. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for letting me come. The hole filler. I fill holes more than fix things.
Yeah, fixer sounds maybe like
scary.
Like a mobster or something like that. And you're definitely not that. This primary that's coming up, how has the campaign trail been so far for the Johnson campaign?
It has been long. You know, Jeff started this race almost 15 months ago, and he started out long before the caucuses a year ago. He built teams, and he's been out there meeting with people for 15 months. So this is, we're coming down to 2 weeks before the primary after a 15-month kind of race and traveling around the state and putting on thousands of miles. It's been great, though. It's been a great race.
There's this dynamic of you had the endorsement process, which you had to battle for that in the beginning, and then going into the primary. What is the difference between getting the endorsement and winning a primary?
I think it's big. I mean, and think back when this race started. I mean, there was Dave Osmick is in the race. Yeah. I mean, there's people that were in the race that weren't in the race 2 months later, and then later on people came into the race. And now we're ultimately, on June 1st, we went to the state convention. And the state convention is the culmination of Republican grassroots activists who are arguably the most informed. They're the most informed Republican voters across the state. They start in February. They go to caucus. They show up. They bring their ideas forward. They cast a vote for the gubernatorial straw poll that Jeff won in the last caucus, and then they get elected to the next level. And those members, their neighbors, basically say, "We're going to elect you to go to the next level and represent us and our interests." And so they go and get elected to the Senate districts. And at that point, they get elected to either to congressional district conventions and/or the state convention. And in this case, it was a state convention, and there's about 2,216
about that
state delegates that then meet. In this case, it was in Duluth, and they basically cast their ballot for Jeff. And there was great candidates that people got to meet with one-on-one throughout this process and ask them really tough questions on where they stand on education, where they stand on transportation funding, where they stand on family values, welfare and poverty initiatives. Really, really hard questions from activists who are knowledgeable about the issues, and they really want to know where their candidates are gonna stand on issues, and they want to hold them accountable. That's Certainly. The other thing. So I think that's and versus a primary. You've got 1 day, or now we can vote for a month up ahead of time, but it's not quite as interactive. It's not quite as one-on-one. It's not as personal. Now sometimes that can be more difficult for candidates to have that personal relationship, and other times it's not. But those activists are, those are your volunteers, your army, the people that are out there talking to their friends and neighbors about why they support a particular candidate.
And you moved from a field of about 2,216 to a pool of roughly 180, 190,000 people potentially. The case is then made. You're with the Johnson campaign, and then Tim Pawlenty is his opponent in the primary, and Tim Pawlenty did not seek the endorsement. Moving from a pool that small to a pool that large, the case can be made that, hey, maybe the endorsement, is just a few people, insiders, who make decisions. Is the endorsement still relevant in today's process, understanding that you move from a pool of 2,000 people to potentially 200,000 for a primary?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's a debate that's going on right now, for sure. But remember, two things. You go back to caucus, and even though it ultimately ends up with 2,200 people, it started out with as many people who has wanted to participate. And this year it was, I want to say the number was around 12 or 13,000 people who cast ballots. So it started out at a larger number and then kind of dwindled down as people elected those their representatives from their district.
Certainly.
But the debate is a good one, and it's a strong. I mean, it's a strong one. I would argue that I'll be honest. I'm a big endorsement guy. I think that the endorsement allows people like myself and others to run who don't have millions of dollars, who don't know really wealthy people that can help fund their campaign. It's a way that you can grow as a candidate. You learn the issues from meeting with the people. You build those relationships, and then ultimately those relationships hopefully pay off in the end. And Jeff's opponent, he was kind of seeking the endorsement. I mean, he got in. He likes to say he got into the race a little late, and he did. He did. But he went to congressional district conventions and was giving speeches, and he had people represent him when we were talking about the state convention. So he was entertaining the idea of the endorsement, and I think that he realized, he said that it was that it was wrapped up, that Jeff had it wrapped up, and I would argue that it was never wrapped up. There were some strong candidates in contention at the state convention, Mary Giuliani Stevens, just to name one, but. I think he just realized, and this is what happens. I mean, people realize they just can't get it. I mean, it's a lot of work. I mean, there's 124 BPO small Senate districts in the state, and every one of them has a convention, and we went to every one of them. That's a lot of work over 5 or 6 weeks, and then there's 8 congressional district conventions. So, to the larger question, should we be is a primary, is that a better measure of one's support versus only getting the endorsement of 2,216 people? I would submit those 2,216 people know those candidates 10 times better than 99% of those people casting a ballot in a primary.
Certainly.
And also don't forget that Minnesota is about 5.2 million people.
Right.
Right. So I wish we had a lot more people voting in the primary. I wish we had a lot more people voting in the general election. But politics is one of those things that people are, number one, uncomfortable with. Number two, they don't like to, delve too deeply in it because it can become awkward for some. They don't want to lose their friends. They're afraid, and it's so. I would say that having the endorsement. Is something that helps not only the candidate but also helps the party because it's got ambassadors in all of those occupations and neighborhoods that they go back to that are perpetuating the conversation regardless of who the people support. Right. If it's Jeff's opponent or Jeff, this to us is all about moving conservative principles forward, winning so that we can govern and change the state of Minnesota.
And that election takes place on August 14th this time around. What do people need to know headed into the ballot box? Because the process seems to be just a little bit different than voting in a general election, which I'm sure much of our audience is very much accustomed to. Do people need to be, one, registered as a Republican to vote in a primary, and then two, how do you vote in a primary?
You just show up and vote. Minnesota don't have a party registration system. You go in and you go in and register just like a general election, and just so that people know they can vote now. Okay. I think voting started 2 or 3 weeks ago. You can vote early in Minnesota. The legislature changed that law. And so you can go to your city hall and vote right now. You just show up and you can vote. You can vote by mail. But if you decide to vote on the 14th, you go to your polling location and you show up. You sign the voter book like you do at a general election. You get a ballot and you go in and you vote that ballot. So it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty fun. make sure you turn the ballot over, because there are races on the back of even on a primary. And at the end of this, so ultimately what we're doing is we're trying to winnow down so that there's only one candidate per party for the general election.
So after the primary, we will know, if you are a Republican, you will know who your Republican candidate is on the general election ballot.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I was talking to my mother the other night.
Okay.
My mother. And she said, well, I mean, if Tim loses, can he just run as an independent anyway? He's got all this money. And I said, no, Mom, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. Yeah. But yes, there's a lot of confusion around voting. But the most important thing is there's election judges there. There's people there that will help everyone vote. So show up, participate, learn about the candidates, go in there, and you can even wear your favorite candidate's shirt to the polling place now.
Yeah, recent change.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Danny, thank you so much for explaining that process to us. How can people go and find out a little bit more about the campaign you're working for?
It's easy. So you can go on social media. We're trying to inundate you with as much as we possibly can. But Jeff's website is www.johnsonforgovernor.org. It's Johnson for Governor, all spelled out, really long. I get it, but it's memorable. Go there, sign up, and that's probably the best way to learn about Jeff. If you got, we're easy to find. Easy to find.
Very good. Danny Nadeau, thank you so much for joining the Republican Roundtable.
Thank you so much for letting me come in. I really appreciate it.
Of course. This has been the Republican Roundtable. I'm Max Reimer. Make sure you go out and vote on August 14th.